Happy Wednesday to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our midweek little bit of Hebrew as we continue again. We had a little bit of a break with the holidays, getting back into things as we pick up on Daniel chapter 11. Now, chapter 11 starts in with a number of um, somewhat declarations. Remember, this is Daniel with the angelic being, and this angelic being is now declaring unto Daniel the things that occurred in this vision. And this was a vision that really shook him up. And so we'll go through the first 6 verses here today and kind of look at it. Some of this tends to, in my mind anyway, replicate what vision he had earlier. It's just kind of maybe a step beyond. The first one was the vision of the image of gold, at the head of gold and silver and bronze and then clay and iron. So this is taking another vision and taking it a little bit further, but it's still dealing with kingships. It's dealing with who's going to be ruling over the known world at the time, but also in respect to how it affects the Jewish people, mainly Daniel and those that are carried away into Babylon, and then those that remained and were scattered. And so we'll kind of take a look at that. So as we pick up with chapter 11, verse 1, we're reading from the JPS version, Jewish Publication Society. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, kind of follow the names of these kings. You'll recognize some of them, some may be new to you. I stood to be a supporter and a stronghold unto him. And this is the angelic being speaking. So this is interesting again to this thought of, are there angelic beings that are involved with the known kingdoms that exist at that time, and so forth. So we talked about that a little earlier. And now I will declare unto you the truth. Verse 2, behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he is waxed strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. And a mighty king shall stand up, and he shall rule with great dominion, shall do according to his will, which again seems to be something that all kings do. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity. So that would be a word we have to look up and get some clarification there. Nor according to his dominion wherewith he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside these. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, he shall be strong above him and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. And then verse 6 finishes up here, as we end the years, they shall join themselves together, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. Interesting. And she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begot her, and he that obtained her in those times. Verse 6 is going to be a fun one to unpack. A lot of strange verbiage in here. So let's quick take a look at the Jewish sages, what they have to say about this. They point out the hostility between the Medes and the Persians, then turn to friendliness to the Jews as a result of the united efforts of Gabriel and Michael. So this is their take on these 2 angelic beings, Gabriel and Michael, that are involved with the kings of these Medes and Persians. And so then he talks about a moral to be drawn. The course of history is determined by God. So that is the totality of what the sages take out of this group of readings that we're going through here, that God is involved with the course of history and how the nations play into the ultimate favoritism or disfavoritism with the Jewish people, because that's where God is concerned about. Everything revolves around the Jewish people. And it's something to remember throughout history, that no matter what happens from this point on until our present time, God's eyes are on the Jewish people. And so everything will ultimately come back to that and be focused upon that. So verse 2 talks about the four Persian kings and talks about them standing up, the reckoning between Darius, there's Cyrus, there's Ahasuerus, which you will find is connected to the book of Esther. Remember that many of these overlap. The books in the Bible are not sequential. Many of them overlap and occur at different periods of time, although maybe in different areas. And then there's Darius, he's the fourth. So again, Cyrus is a name you may have heard, and there's always references to his interaction with the Jewish people and how he may have shown some favor to them, but he was really not, never converted to Judaism, never was really a nice guy. He just did some things that were favorable to the Jewish people. And so the last one is King Xerxes. And of course, they talk about other writings that describe his wealth. Here's a reference to Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. And then, of course, none of these kingdoms are great. They all are in it for themselves. They all have ulterior motives, and it has to do with materialism and being in power. And so that's what a kingship is all about. And so as we move on to comments on verse 3, talks about another Alexander. Of course, this is the Grecian Empire coming up. Let's see, we talk about Macedonian Empire that was then divided into four parts after the death of Alexander. The sons of Alexander were both murdered. So they're using some history, obviously written quite a bit after this biblical narrative was written, where they come back and say, oh yeah, here's how we identify this as now that all of this has happened and the Grecians and the Persians empires no longer exist. Here's what we saw. And then talk about Ptolemy and Seleucus, who were the kings in Egypt during the time of Alexander's reign. They were in alliance. And then we finally get to verse 6, and it talks about this intermarriage. And verse 6 here is really expounded upon by the Jewish sages because they had the history to look at who the daughter was of Berenice, and how she married, and then it looks like he died suddenly. There were divorces that took place, and of course, then all the things that happened during this marriage and the alliance and the struggles, and finally that takes us through, the death, and takes us to the end of verse 6. So let's go into Bible Hub and see if we can find any interesting words that we want to unpack in the time we have remaining. It talks about the confirming and strengthening, and here in the Hebrew, it has the word chazak. And chazak is a very common word in Hebrew, meaning strong. It's a very common phrase that those that speak Hebrew will use to encourage one another, saying chazak, chazak, be strong, be strong. And so it's interesting that this word for strengthening is being used as a word for confirmation. Then we see the next word, which is ma'oz, and that is also a word for being translated as strength, but it gives more of an indication of a fortress, of a defense. And so a little bit of insight there. Verse 2, we do not see any really interesting Hebrew words here. Yasir, Yashir, to be richer. Osher Gadol, to be great. It just magnifies the riches and makes them greater. Stirring up the realm of Greece, and then shall rise a king who shall rule with dominion. We'll see the word for dominion is mashal, which has to do with the word of ruling, of being in dominion, having authority over. And unfortunately, that's how kingdoms worked. Someone was in power, someone ruled over someone else. You had those that were in power, taking always advantage of those who were not as strong. And again, this is just describing what happened. It doesn't mean it was condoned by God. It doesn't mean necessarily it was approved or orchestrated by God, but it's something that happened because of the powers that were there, and the Jewish people, um, basically were affected by all of these things. But again, pointing out that this is still showing that God is there hearing their prayers. He is listening to them. He provides miracles in the midst of all of this chaos that's going on in these different kingdoms. The Jewish people were never forgotten. And, Daniel's being shown that God is still in control. So we get to verse 5. Another king becomes strong, gains power, has a dominion, a great dominion, the word mashal being used twice. And then at the end of some years, they shall join forces, talks about this daughter of the king, uses traditional words here. I don't see any influence, some of the Aramaic here, Shavoah, and then the king will go and make an agreement. So again, you wonder what the people thought. What did the Jewish people think as all of these negotiations were going on, all of the alliances were being struck? How did it affect the Jewish people? How did they survive? Daniel was still very strong in the kingdom. And we'll have to look at that when we come back and follow in the next verses. So this kind of sets the stage. A lot of information here. I just say, please go back and read it on your own, knowing that you have the ability to go to the Bible Hub. If there are any words that interest you, please feel free to explore that. You'll find it's very, very interesting and can help you unpack just a greater understanding. So this is kind of a segue. Hope you do well in your studies, and we look forward to having you come back next week as we continue with verse 7. God bless you all. Bye-bye.